Do you know? Resources. Resources are a thing that we all are using from when we born to till date. But exactly we are not knowing कि the things that we are using that comes in resources. We are surrounded by a number of gifts of nature in the form of air, water, sunlight, soil, land, rocks, natural vegetations, and animals, etc. Over a period of time, man has learned to make use of these gifts of nature. Man, with his knowledge, effort, and technology, has converted these gifts of nature into useful items. Now, these useful items are called as resources. In this chapter, we shall study about resources. What are resources? Anything that can be used to satisfy a need, from the water you drink to the electricity you use in your house and the rickshaw you use to get home from school, are all considered as resources. Now you will understand the resources with this flowchart. Now the classification of resources. According to this, resources are divided in two categories. The one is natural resource and the second is human resource. In the natural resource, the resources are classified again in two categories: renewable resource and non-renewable resources. Now, the another classification of renewable resources is continuous or flow, example wind, water, etc. And biological resource. And biological resources are also divided in two categories: natural vegetation, forest, and wildlife. Now, the second is non-renewable resource. In non-renewable resources also classified two categories: recyclable, example metals, and non-recyclable, example fossil fuels. Now the second classification of resources are human, structure and institutions, and quantity and quality. Now we will understand this flowchart deeply. We are going to study natural resource. What is natural resource? These are the material objects and energy resources that exist in the environment around us. Air, water, and naturally growing plants are essential for survival. Some others help in satisfaction of secondary wants, air and sunlight, and available properly. Natural resources are obtained from land, soil, water, animals, and mines. Besides these are energy resources. Now, the natural resources are classified in two categories. The first one is renewable resources. Now, what is renewable resource? These resources can be renewed or replenished with the human efforts or activity. However, some are unlimited in nature and may not be affected by human use. Here are some examples of renewable resources: solar energy, wind energy, tidal energy, etc. Soil and forest, although are renewable resources, but reckless and careless use of these can turn them into depletion. Similarly, although water is unlimited in nature at present, but due to the misuse and pollution of water bodies, it may become a scarce resource in future. Now, the second classification of natural resource is non-renewable resources. These resources are limited in nature and their rate of formation is extremely slow. It needs thousands of years to renew. Hence, once they are used, they take thousands or at times millions of years to be renewed for future use. Examples of non-renewable resources are coal, oil, petroleum, and natural gas. On the basis of their distribution, some natural resources can be found everywhere, while some may be found in particular regions. Hence, they can be classified as ubiquitous or localized resource. Now again, we have to learn the second classification of resource, that is human resource, in deeply. So we are going to study human resource. Now the first is man-made resource. A man-made resource is a resource that has been created through the act of humans. Natural substance become resource only when human beings change their original form with the help of their knowledge and technology. For examples, iron ore in its natural form was not a resource till men learned to extract iron from it and used it in industries, dams, bridges, etc. Now, the example of man-made resource are factories, hospitals, schools, and roads, etc. Now, the second classification of human resource is human as a resource. The human beings are most important resource. Human beings with their skills and technology and hard work harness the natural resources. Economic prosperity of a country depends on how the available resources are harnessed by human beings. Example, all human beings are comes in human as a resource. Now, in this classification of resources we have completed. Now one more thing are there in this topic, that is conservation of resources, means how to conserve the resources, how to use the resources that the future generation can utilize the resources and use the resources. All the resources should be used very carefully and wisely, and while exploiting the resources we must give them time to be renewed. If we are not careful, then the renewable resources will become scarce and will be exhausted. For example, water, fossil fuels, petroleum, oil, they are replenished and even in the depletion. But if we are using it carefully, then we can easily use in future also. Now, one example of conservation of resources is rainwater harvesting, and it is very much important in today's time. Now, the one more way we can conserve the resources. Through this diagram, you may easily understand how we may conserve the resources. We need to balance the use of resources for our needs and also need to conserve them for future. For sustainable development, we need to reduce consumption, recycle and reuse the products. Now, what is the meaning of reduce? To reduce the consumption of petrol, we can have a car pull to go to office or school. Recycle. Old newspaper and magazines can be recycled and a paper can be used to create out of it. Now the third one is reuse. Waste water from the RO plants can be used to water the plants at home. This is the way through which we can conserve our resources, and this is the 3R cycles that we have to follow. Thank you everyone.